Start the recording. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, NIMAS and Braille 2000 with MathML. Today I'm joined by Rosemary Baggett, who is an experienced Braille transcriber, and I'm going to start this presentation today giving you all some background about the NIMAC and how you can work with the NIMAC, particularly for folks who may not already be registered accessible media producers with us. And then I'm going to hand it over to Rosemary, and she's going to talk about how to utilize that MathML tagging in your NIMAS files for your accessible format production. And thanks for being here today, Rosemary.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Liz, for having me.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and get started. So like I said, I'll be covering some of that background information and how you can work with the NIMAC if you aren't already working with us. I'll also introduce the topic of MathML and show a few examples of this math tagging in NIMAS files. And then I'm going to hand it over to Rosemary, and she's going to bring you that transcriber's perspective and how she utilizes that tagging for her Braille production. So first, let's talk a little bit about some NIMAC background. The NIMAC was created by IDEA 2004, and we serve as the national source file repository for K-12 textbooks and instructional materials. We make NIMAS files available for use in producing accessible formats like Braille for K-12 instructional materials for qualifying students. As of right now, we are happy to say that we have over 74,500 file sets from over 180 educational publishers in the NIMAC repository. And we're also pleased to say that all 50 states plus the 6 eligible territories work with the NIMAC. So no matter where you're coming from today to join us, your state does work with us. And so we can work with you, and you can utilize NIMAS for your Braille production process. So what is NIMAS? NIMAS stands for the National Instructional Materials Accessibility Standard. It is an XML-based source file format, and it's established for the sole purpose of use in producing accessible formats like Braille and DAISY and EPUB and large print. NIMAS files are not student-ready files. That's a question that we get somewhat often, particularly from TVIs and folks working in the field. NIMAS files are production files, and they're something that requires further conversion work into an accessible format before it can be utilized by a student. And we're going to look at some examples of tagging today, so you'll see why they are not human-readable files. It's also important to know that NIMAS is not a byproduct of the print or digital book production process. So NIMAS isn't a file format that publishers have on hand already. It is something that has to be created separately after the book is finalized. Most publishers, almost all publishers, don't produce their own NIMAS files. They instead work with conversion vendors who create them for them. And this is important to know because if you are working on a project and we don't already have a file in the system, and it's something that maybe you or an authorized user who you're working with want to request from us, it can take 6 weeks or more for a NIMAS file to be produced. So just an important caveat there. How do we receive these files? So under IDEA 2004, there's only one mechanism to require NIMAS from publishers, and that is in that book adoption contract or purchase agreement. So there's no blanket requirement in IDEA for publishers to submit files to us. Instead, states and districts have been able to require NIMAS anytime they purchase new textbooks since 2006, when we went into business. And the goal with having that NIMAS included in that procurement process is so that the file is already there, it's already in the system when that need for an accessible format is identified. So there's no delay in the timely delivery there with regards to beginning the accessible format production process. What might you find in the NIMAC repository? We receive a really wide range of student-facing instructional materials. This can include textbooks, workbooks, supplementary readers, as well as some ancillary materials. One important thing to note there is that we don't receive teachers' editions almost ever. There are a few exceptions where a teacher's edition of the material might have a substantial portion that is student handouts, things that are actually given directly to a student. In that case, we would receive just those pages. NIMAS cannot be utilized to produce accessible formats on behalf of teachers, only those eligible students. So that's why that is in place. We also don't receive NIMAS for files like material that's pre-2006, so pre-NIMAS. We don't have trade books in the system unless that is a book that is part of a reading program and is tied to a reading curriculum. So you will find those materials in the NIMAC, materials that have been repackaged and published by an educational publisher as part of a reading curriculum. We will receive those, but generally speaking, we're not going to have your Charlotte's Web or your 1984 in the NIMAC. We also don't have files for college textbooks. Again, there are parameters for who can be served under IDEA and the NIMAC. So we don't receive those college textbooks or just general reference books. Another good thing to note is that the NIMAC can now receive files for some digital instructional materials. And if you have any questions at all about that, please don't hesitate to reach out and we'd be happy to share more information about that. So I've pointed to this a couple times so far, but I did want to touch on that student eligibility piece because that is an important part of IDEA. Materials produced from NIMAS can only be distributed to qualifying students in elementary or secondary education, and that eligibility requirement is that the student must have both an IEP as well as a certified disability under the NLS eligibility guidelines. There is a link here in the slides to more information about those eligibility guidelines if you need more information about that. But it is just important to note that restriction around NIMAS eligibility. And NIMAS is also not available for use on behalf of students outside of the US or the eligible territories. And again, to reiterate this, NIMAS is also not available for use on behalf of students in higher education either. Some folks on the call today may assist with producing Braille for folks who are working at the college level. And the Access Text Network is a great place to look if you're trying to find accessible files for students in higher education. So how does the NIMAC work with your state? Each state that agrees to work with the NIMAC names a state coordinator, and this individual is responsible for designating the authorized users for each state. There are typically about 4 or 5 authorized users in each state, and these are the folks that have full access to the NIMAC repository to any file that they can download, or they can assign it to an accessible media producer. These people tend to be working either at the state education agency, perhaps at a school for the blind, or an instructional resource center of some kind. And we're always happy to connect you with authorized users in your state. Accessible media producers, who hopefully many of you all already have accessible media producer accounts with the NIMAC, you are able to search the NIMAC repository and see what is there, but you are not able to download just any file from the repository. AMP accounts allow the user to download files that are assigned to them by an authorized user. AMP accounts are freely available to anyone, to individual transcribers, as well as folks that are working at a nonprofit or for-profit providers. So there's no restriction there. And you don't have to be designated by the state coordinator. All you have to do for an account is reach out to us and we're happy to help get you set up with one, but you will only be able to download those files that are assigned to you by an authorized user as part of an order for an accessible format for an eligible student. So again, if you are joining us today and you're not currently registered with us as an AMP, the way to start that process is to reach out to us via email with your name, your email address, and your organization name. And then we'll enter you in the system. You'll receive an automated link with an automated email with a link to complete that registration. And you'll be able at that point to select your format capabilities in the system. So you'll be able to list if you produce PDFs, if you produce digital Braille, if you produce hard copy Braille. There are numerous capabilities that you can select for your account. And once you have that activated account, any authorized user in any state will be able to assign you files for download for your projects. We are not involved in the business arrangements between states and districts and AMPs, but if you do need help locating an authorized user in your state to assign you the file, please do reach out to us. We're always more than happy to connect you with those folks, and then you can work with them and get plugged into that system. All right, that was a lot of information pretty quickly. I don't know if anyone has put any questions in the chat, or if you would like to unmute and ask your question out loud, you're welcome to do so.
Nope.
All right. If no one has any questions, then we'll jump into to our primary topic today, which is MathML and NIMAS. And like I said, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about MathML tagging and showing you a few examples. And then I'm going to hand it over to Rosemary, and she's going to talk about how you can utilize this tagging in your Braille production process. So MathML is optional XML markup for math and scientific notation. The benefit of MathML is that when your software supports it, it can be used to automatically generate Braille or other formats. In the past, and as I'm sure probably everyone on this call knows who has ever produced Braille math is most often provided as images, and this is true in NIMAS as well, and those cannot be automatically converted into Braille. So that is an important distinction. Many publishers who work with us do now provide MathML in their NIMAS files, but we know that not all software supports MathML. So if you are working with a NIMAS file, for math, and you don't want the MathML as part of your download, you are able to choose that as a download option in the NIMAX system, and I'm going to show you a screenshot of that. So this is the page that you'll see when you go in to download a NIMAS file. And as you can see, you can select either full download or full download no MathML. If you choose that no MathML download, you will instead get all of the images for the math expressions. These are called fallback images, and these can be used to aid in transcription as well as tactile graphic production. So that is always an option for you if you don't want to utilize the MathML in the file. And here are just a few examples on screen. So on the left, you can see a page from a textbook. This is from an Inspire Physics book. And then on the right, at the top of the screen, you can see two images of math expressions. And those are what we would call fallback images. So that's where the actual math expression itself is provided as an image. And then below that, you can see other types of math images that are always provided in NIMAS files as well. So all of the images from any book that you work with will always be present in that NIMAS file set. It's important to note that sometimes math expressions might be provided as regular text within files that do contain MathML. So sometimes you'll kind of have this mixed experience where some math expressions in the file are tagged with MathML tagging, and then others may not be. And Rosemary is going to talk more about the implications for that in your transcription work in the next section. I did want to show you one example, and this is also, you can see why a NIMAS file is not something that you would want to just hand to a student, because on the left, you can see how it is tagged to show the contents of the image from that textbook that is on the right-hand side of the screen. So the first example at the top is an example where math was tagged as quote unquote regular text. And so you can see just the MR and squared was provided just as text, tagged, highlighted in yellow there. And then below that, example that's highlighted in the aqua is where the math expression was tagged with MathML. So you can tell this because all of the tagging around the math expression has the M:(M) preceding all of the various types of math tags that are available as part of MathML. So if you are someone who likes to look at that XML file and see if there's MathML present, that is how you will be able to tell which math expressions were tagged with MathML. So like I said, it's MathML is pretty easy to spot. The tagging is pretty easy to spot, but it's not necessarily human readable. You can also tell if your file has MathML in it by looking at the declaration at the very top of the XML file, or you can search, if you open your XML file, you can search for that m:\math tag, and you'll be able to find the MathML expressions that way as well. And then this is just a screenshot showing you the two examples that I described. So at the very top, you have that declaration that will be present at the very beginning of the XML, the NIMAS XML file when you open it. So if you're curious, if you downloaded a file that has MathML present in it, you can open it up and take a look and see if that is present or not. And then below that, you can see that those mmath tags wrapping that MathML expression. And so that's another way to determine if something is tagged with MathML or not. And now I'll pause just quickly to see if anyone has any questions on just those basics. And before I hand it over to Rosemary, and she'll dive into what you can do with MathML. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen, Rosemary, so you can pull up yours.
Okay, thanks.
Of course.
You know what, Liz?
What?
I haven't talked about this. Because I think I might need to use your screen because my program's open on another laptop with my notes. So, but in order to access the slides, I need to do it through you, right? Okay.
I'll just click through
Yeah.
on my end then.
I thought it out at the middle as you were talking, so thanks.
No problem. No problem. Okay. Yep. So just if you just want to cue me on when you want me to switch, I will do that.
Okay, we'll do. Do we have any questions in there?
It didn't look like
It's
it.
not. Okay. Well, so for everybody's ready, I'll dive into this. We're going to, next slide will be what we're going to cover with transcribing MathML. We'll start with the workflow for opening NIMAS files with MathML in BrailleBlaster. And then within BrailleBlaster, how to identify MathML, what it looks like in the print view, and then Braille view, what to watch out for in translations. Some of it's really clear and other things to look for might not be as clear. Do look at examples of editing MathML translations for both UEB and NIMAS. And then we'll take a brief look at the end at, using BrailleBlaster translation in your Braille software. Yeah, and then also a little bit at how to open in Braille 2000, which is an option, but we'll just look at that briefly. So next slide would be first how to open NIMAS with MathML in BrailleBlaster. So in the BrailleBlaster program, in the control panel, you see at the top left, there's an arrow pointing to the word file. Just select file, select file, and it will give you the option to open. And once you open, it will go to the next slide. I'm looking at my other computer. Once we open, is that the second one or the third one?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, once we open. There are translation settings, and the settings in the top toolbar are ones that I find some of those very helpful. BrailleBlaster is going to open the whole XML file, and it will open it. You can do this after it's open, but you're going to translate. I use the translation settings for either UEB with NIMAS or UEB, whichever of those options you're going to do, or any of you see them in the drop-down menu. And then in the next slide, another setting that I like to use, the emphasis at the top. And you'll see highlighted in red, the red circle, the ones that I've found most helpful. A lot of, because the print books are showing bold type, it's mostly for visual emphasis. So those are not used in Braille in some selections, so in some places. So you can either remove emphasis from the entire selection, I prefer to not do that because there are places where it's going to be important for meaning. So, but I'll select the remove all emphasis from headings, list prefixes, and alphabetic references, ones that are typically not emphasized according to the codes. So each one you select it, hit enter, and it takes several seconds to a minute, and the whole file will be done for you. So that's kind of an initial thing I do before I move it to my transcription program. So the next slide would be, once you've got it as set as you can, you save as a BRF. Otherwise, BrailleBlaster will create is it a BBX or a BBZ file? I forget, Liz. I don't use them, but BrailleBlaster creates its own kind of file that we don't use in transcription. So,
yeah, it's a BBX file, and
okay,
that is that's the default. Like if you just pressed save in BrailleBlaster, that's what you would create.
right. So we save BRF, and then the file that we have in BrailleBlaster is now a BRF and can be resaved within your transcription program. And I'll show that briefly in the next slide. BrailleBlaster will prompt you where in your system, not that one back. Yeah, Braille. Oh, I'm sorry, it is one ahead. No, okay, so I didn't show it, but BrailleBlaster will prompt you where you want to save it in your system, and I save it into whatever file name I'm using for that project, and it will pull up in Braille 2000 in this case we're talking about. So going back to still in BrailleBlaster, how to identify MathML. This is more for just searching through and getting a look at it. It's not something you necessarily use in transcription, but I think the page that Liz showed a picture of before from the Inspire Physics book, if you wanted to look at that, you go into, in BrailleBlaster, you hit Control-G, and it will open this little box in the top window shown there in red. And into that little window, you type your page number and hit enter. Yes, I do believe this PowerPoint will be available at some point. It popped up, and Liz will tell you how to get that. So next slide will be, this shows the print, screenshot of the print book, and then we're going to take a look at what this looks like in BrailleBlaster. So in this particular project, in this particular book, there was a lot of stuff that was tagged as MathML, and then there were some things that were not, and that was within this particular work. So if it's not tagged as MathML and does not, it may not show up in the Braille file, but you'll see the word null in Braille. And the ones that are circled in the top part of the page, you see 3 math expressions circled. These have actually been translated into MathML. So if we can skip ahead and look and see what that looks like. Okay, so BrailleBlaster, when you open BrailleBlaster, it has the print view on the left side of the screen, and then on the right side will be the Braille view. The pink highlighting is used in the print view to help locate the MathML tagged expressions. So here you see, if you can just look at the first one that says parentheses SQRT, then the closing parentheses, and another one. You can flip back for one moment to the slide before, Liz. You'll see the first circled expression here is actually the square root radicand. So there it is in print, and then skipping ahead. Again, this is what it looks like in the print view in BrailleBlaster. This is ASCII code. So there are 3 math expressions there highlighted, and we'll look at them next in BrailleBlaster in the Braille view, which would be on the next. And the part at the bottom was the part that was not translated. Yeah. Okay. So go ahead to the Braille view, please. You'll notice at the bottom the word null. If you've ever seen that in a work, it just means that part was tagged as meant to be MathML, but for some reason didn't get translated. I've only seen that in 2 books, and they're working on those.
I am telling you my lived experience is that as a child who grew up poor.
What? I missed.
I think someone inadvertently
Okay.
unmuted, so
Okay,
I muted them.
okay, thank you. All right, so the, again, there's 3 expressions up above. You see them in the Braille. This is the Braille View and BrailleBlaster, and they're circled in red, and this is actually the, well, take a look at it. This is actually the UEB trend conversion. And they have been well translated. Anything on these two? Yeah, I'm taking a look at these. These were all translated directly into the MathML. I mean, into UEB, and with a few, there are a few things that will need to be edited by the transcriber. So we'll show those as we go on. And the next slide would show. No, did I do? Okay, so if you open it in UEB and you want to switch to UEB with NIMAS, you can go back and forth within BrailleBlaster. Familiar with that? So again, looking at the top circle in red under settings, you select settings. Under settings, the drop-down menu, one option is translation settings. The next picture down below that shows the options in translation settings. So from the UEB that I was in, I would scroll down, select UEB with NIMAS, UEB plus NIMAS, hit enter, and it takes a few minutes and it converts the entire file to UEB with NIMAS. And you can go back and forth within BrailleBlaster. And if you happen to be working with both, but most people for transcription, it's going to be one or the other, but it will convert the entire file. So once the BrailleBlaster has converted that, I see the next slide. Example, these same 3 expressions now in NIMAS. There are a few edits that need to be done. Basically, as a transcriber, you need to be checking everything, proofreading everything. Not everything is foolproof. There are, for example, in this one, you'll see that the first expression is accurately, well, they're accurately translated. The whole first expression was tagged MathML, and the second one, you have 1/2 comma, and the comma has been not tagged. The 1/2 was tagged MathML. The comma was not, so it appears as a number 1 after the closing fraction indicator. So there you're going to have to change that to a .6 comma, or if you were in a, it depends on where you are in the transcription. It's either .6 or you have your NIMAS switch indicators followed by the comma. The same thing with the next expression, square root of b equals b to the 1/2, and the final period again looks like a number 4. So their transcriber would need to put in a closing punctuation indicator or a NIMAS punctuation indicator, or the switch indicators. You're going to have to insert your NIMAS switch indicators, and that's going to depend on context. So next slide. Is this a different page? Okay, this is from the same page. I just took these examples and showed how they would be edited. I just described it before, but here's the slide showing the edits for those. You notice the print at the top, the UEB with NIMAS translation below that, and you see the second expression, the 1/2 comma, and so down below I put the switch indicators in, changed the comma to a .6, and then the last expression showed the 2 options, either using the switch indicators around the whole expression and putting the period after that, or a punctuation indicator if there was more NIMAS to follow. So again, just going to require transcriber attention. And I'm ready for the next slide. This is another example from another book, and I was excited to find this in another book more recently. It's like, oh, MathML is they're catching these other types of expressions, fractions. Most of the ones we looked at before, if there's a fraction in there, they're being converted into maths. The horizontal bar and modifier over the AB, if you look in the table, and this table was longer. Just took a screenshot of part of it, and we're using, I showed the conversions for the first line across. So the measure of line AB, you'll notice in the pink highlighting down below within BrailleBlaster, Braille View, the part that was pink was actually MathML tagged. You'll notice that the equal signs that I have errored were not caught in that expression. So those are going to have to be edited for sure in your transcription. So looking at the next slide, the next slide shows the UEB conversion, and the three examples highlighted in this is just across the top line of the table. So this table was formatted in the list form. It was a list format with headings. So you'll see those three circled expressions in UEB, and they were pretty much, there were a couple edits needed to be made. I can't point here, but the first expression in the red, you'll see that it shows the double grade one word indicator, double dot 56. The measure of the opening and closing Braille indicators, you'll see the double cap in there. So they're double capitalizing the AB. And for consistency in the volume, because most of the places you put individual capital indicators before each variable, I changed that in the expression down below. I just edited it to show capital A, capital B, closing. And the equal sign, because we're in UEB, even though it wasn't tagged in MathML, it works okay, because NIMAS will take UEB and convert it into some math expressions automatically convert. So the equal signs happen to be one of them. This just shows some edits that needed to be done. Notice in the second expression, they used the individual capital signs because there was a prime afterwards. The prime is also being picked up and by MathML. And then the third one, I had to edit within the second, the denominator of the fraction. So you had capital A prime, capital B prime over capital A, capital B. So that's the UEB. So it's all pretty much there, just a little bit of tweaking. The next slide shows the NIMAS translation. And here's where the fact that the equal sign was not tagged shows up, because you have your first expression, it's a NIMAS expression, measure of AB with a horizontal line over it. And then you have a UEB equal sign. So down below, you'll see where I had to edit those. Everything else was, I think, pretty much the same. So again, all of these just require careful attention on the transcriber's part. And then, of course, your switch indicators are going to need to be entered, but that's going to depend on your context. So, okay. And then I'll do one other example, and then before taking any questions, and that would be their spatial arrangements. BrailleBlaster is starting to incorporate the spatial arrangements that come out in NIMAS with MathML tagging, and that was exciting to see. This is just one example of a system of equations. You see the print view at the top, and then the UEB with NIMAS translation down below. And I'm calling that symbol that's circled the strange symbol. I haven't spoken with anyone yet about it, but it's not it's just a little Braille glitch thing in there. I think it's intentional. I've seen it be intentional to show the separation, where there should be a separation between lines in a system of equations or any kind of long spatial arrangement that has multiple lines to it. So, and some of them are much longer than this. I just selected one with two. So what I did editing wise was this one, it's pretty much, this was the NIMAS. And it's pretty straightforward, except for having to remove the strange symbol and drop the second equation down to the line below and put the opening brace, curly brace there. And the next slide showing the UEB translation of the same thing. It's a little bit not as clear. I needed a little more editing. if you were reading the Braille, I needed to remove, there did not need to be a grade 1 indicator in front of the opening variable Y because it was in contact with the curly brace. And I used to call those brackets, but I like calling them curly braces. I think that's what they call it in the code. The 120 plus 18x, this one doesn't have the strange symbol. I think that's only appearing in NIMAS. So you have to look carefully, find the end of the first equation, the 18x, and then cut it there to the next line, put the y equals on the next line, and add the braces in. Also put the enlarged brace symbol since it's multi-line. So any questions so far?
Yeah, if anyone has any, and also, you're of course welcome to unmute and ask your questions out loud. And I know someone had asked earlier about the PowerPoint being available. We are recording this session. We will have captions and it will be uploaded to YouTube and available on our website. And then we will also upload the slides to our website as well. And I'll share that link out to everyone once we have it posted. So you will have access to it after.
Okay, well, if there's no questions, I'll go on to the next section. I'm going to show an example of how to take all of this stuff and incorporate the MathML that exists into a table with a graphic example. So this was a page shown earlier from the Inspire Physics book, and just from a transcriber's perspective, the red outlined items on the right were the things that the expressions that were tagged as MathML. And I think in the NIMAS, they were ready to go. There was some editing needed to be done in the UEB. I'll show you as we go on. The very top expression, the MR squared, because there was not a fraction there, and at this point, the MathML tagging was not picking up the superscript. That one was just what's called considered regular math, so that needed a little more editing. So looking at the next slide, I took just that first item, that MR squared. You see the screenshot of the expression, and then the UEB translation down below, and the UEB with NIMAS down below that, along with the switch indicators. And on the right just showed what the BrailleBlaster view looked like. It was I had to be careful there because, well, I had to remove the italics indicators and add the superscript indicator. So, and the next slide shows, oh, I just showed that. Yeah, I showed that in both. Okay, the next slide just shows the other expressions that were tagged as MathML. And I didn't catch this initially when we did this slide, but the expressions on the right, the UEB with NIMAS, were all show accurate output. The ones under UEB translation, there does not, that grade 1 indicator in front of the superscript, the level up indicator, does not need to be there in these examples because the numeric indicator at the beginning of each expression sets grade 1 mode for the entire expression. So it's not, wouldn't be inaccurately read. It's just a symbol that's not necessary in there. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these slides. And I did correct it for the actual graphic. So going to the, this was one, again, the next slide was another one of the expressions that was tagged MathML, just a longer one that didn't fit on that chart the page before. 1/2 m parentheses L squared plus W squared, closing parentheses. Again, the UEB with NIMAS was all accurate output. The UEB accurate output, except it did not need the level indicators. The other thing is, here's the fraction UEB, and this is where it gets so complicated. I don't know how programmers have amazing brains to catch all this stuff, but the fraction the fraction expression there, it's going to read as a fraction to the reader. It's just in UEB, you don't need the opening and closing general fraction indicators because the basic fraction 1/12 is considered a simple fraction. I think they did that because it was in contact with the rest of the expression. But so when I edited it down at the bottom, transcriber edit, I changed the fraction notation to just 1/12, which is your simple fraction, which is all that's needed there. And again, I removed the extra grade 1 indicators in front of the exponents. So that edit is the one that they used in the next page, which, well, 2 pages on. This is the print view. The red box at the bottom shows this entry, just taking this entry from your print view with the material you get in the NIMAS file. NIMAS, you'll see in the next slide. Is it the next slide? Yes, NIMAS formatted that before you go. It formatted that as a list, and they took the left column. The left column object was the cell 5 heading for the list. Wait a minute, moment of inertia object. Yeah, they repeated that in each one. Okay, so they took the object, made that the cell 5 heading, and then each of the other headings below was, to the right of that in the table, was in list format with the titles repeated, and then the text after that. So if we can take a look at that on the next slide. This is how the NIMAS file formatted the table for you. So there is table formatting in there, and then some of that's going to be describer choice, how you opt to do it, but I found this very helpful. And then for the last expression, the last column was the moments of inertia, and that's where the math expressions were. And so you see in red circle is the that expression that was shown edited on the page before. So, and then I took all of that and pasted it into the next slide, or pasted it into the graphics program, and used the image from the NIMAS file for graphics artist to reproduce that and put it all together on a slide here. So that's that example. And we can go on. If we're doing okay for time, Liz, how are we doing? Because the next one is optional. The next slide would be just a quick, another example of math as regular text. This is math as regular text in a NIMAS file. So this was not tagged as MathML. In this case, I think eventually our goal is to, when they see an exponent or operation signs, that those expressions will be tagged as MathML. For right now, they were not yet in this book. And so you'll notice that the print, the 1.7200 times 10 to the 5th M, in the BrailleBlaster print view, you look at the view below, it came out as 105 M, which is obviously a different number. So the exponent was not picked up. So the BrailleBlaster UEB translation shown below, you just see 105 M, and transcriber edited just needed to put in the superscript indicator and numeric indicator in front of the 5. And in the next slide, did the same thing with, well, actually, I did not show that in NIMAS, but you get the idea. Transcriber is going to need to edit that to follow print. Print is always your guide. So any questions on that? That's the that's what I have on using BrailleBlaster to import and to edit, using the BrailleBlaster imported file to edit the Braille 2000.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat.
Okay.
A few things I did want to add, just that, you know, Rosemary had mentioned earlier that not everything that's tagged as MathML always comes over correctly in your Braille translation software. And Rosemary is actually someone that we've brought on to help with some testing around BrailleBlaster and their MathML translation. So all of the Braille softwares out there, whatever you're using, if you're using Braille 2000, BrailleBlaster, Duxbury, they're all kind of constantly working to improve their MathML translation. So it could be that you have that experience now, and in the next version of the software that is fixed and it is translating correctly. But that's just something to note. And then I also wanted to point out, because I think I may have skimmed over this at the beginning, but MathML is optional tagging in NIMAS. So while publishers, we do increasingly see math expressions tagged with MathML, it is not a requirement. And so that is how you can have files like the one that we've shown today, where some math is tagged with MathML and some is not, because it is not a requirement for every single expression in the file to be tagged as MathML. And that is just important to note, because ideally, MathML tagging is a time saver. It's something that you can use to help speed up your Braille production, but it's not guaranteed to always be there. And these skills that we're talking about right now are important, because it's good to be able to identify if the file has it, to troubleshoot things if you need to, or to be able to reach out to us to ask questions if you're wondering about the content in a file, or noticing something wacky that you're not sure about. So that's why, we want you to kind of have these skills in your tool belt going forward, because we are seeing more and more files with that MathML tagging, and we're really hoping that you'll be able to utilize it.
Thank you, Liz.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Yeah. Yeah. And the combination of the fact that it can be there and accurate, but it might just need a little tweaking for the context, like the grade one index. So again, as with any Braille we're getting from anywhere, they just need to be on your toes with checking your print and checking your edit.
Absolutely.
So, okay. So, and then in the next session, just a little bit on all of that material was on using a file that was opened, a NIMAS file that was opened with BrailleBlaster as an intermediary step. And that's the way I've been doing it for a while. I like the tools in BrailleBlaster for editing. There's also the option to open an NIMAS file directly in Braille 2000. And the basic steps for that are here. Just see the arrow in Braille 2000 in the toolbar, you select open, and from that source file, and that will take you to the XML file on your computer. And the next slide just show an example. There was the file. I opened that window and selected the XML, and that was automatically imported into BrailleBlaster. And the next slide shows what will pop up in BrailleBlaster is, and that's not the BRF, but that's the XML file. So at that point, you get this transcription settings pop-up window in BrailleBlaster, and pop-up box, we call it. This one, the default was set to eBay. So that's something don't know exactly why that was. I think that's been changed, but that was my default. I didn't want eBay. I think it's back several years. So from there, you select change in the next slide. Select change, you get this drop-down menu, select ICEB for UEB, if that's what you want, unless you want French or Italian or something else. And then the window to the right shows the other drop-down menu and which one you select. So this was UEB. That once I select all of that, it will open the NIMAS file in BrailleBlaster, and I do my editing from there. So I just have one example. I'm sorry, not in BrailleBlaster, in Braille 2000, misspoke. So I have one example here of math opened in Braille 2000. Now this was several months ago, so this was just showing one example. I spoke with Bob Stepp just earlier today, even, and he's continually working on this. His goal is to have all of the MathML translatable in Braille 2000, both in UEB and NIMAS, but it's a long process, and he's continuing that. And complexity of the codes is making it challenging, which I totally understand. But his hope is continually that to be this month or next month. So this is one example, and again, the expression in the print is, you see it down below, it's a long one. And my observation of that at that point was Braille 2000 was picking up on the level indicators. So both the exponents and the subscripts were translated. And this is into UEB. I did the UEB translation here. So it was picking up on those. What was it not getting? Well, the spacing, obviously. And I know he's been working on that. And still working on spacing and I say fractions. Have X equals. Okay, yeah, well, there was fraction indicator in there, but it was the general fraction indicator instead of the simple. And that's, again, the complexity of the code. But this is an example of the goals and the incredible work going on with programmers all over the place to make these things available. And that's about what I have, Liz.
And I'm sorry, Rosemary, can you remind me, because I know you're testing in a beta version of Braille 2000. Is that version available yet for folks?
Yeah, that's version 3. And so
Okay.
no, that's not available yet. That's when I say he's working on making that available.
Right.
But he's
Okay.
still,
So the people on here today are probably still working in version 2.
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for
Yeah,
clarifying that. I
sure.
forgot to say
Yeah.
that. Yeah, big difference.
Yeah.
It's not there in version 2.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Okay. Yeah, I
okay.
thought as much. And so one last thing I want to mention is that this year we have started user groups, both for folks who use Duxbury and folks who use Braille 2000 who work with NIMAS files. And these groups meet on Zoom quarterly. Rosemary leads our Braille 2000 discussion, does a great job with that. And then we have another transcriber, Susan Martinez, who's leading our Duxbury discussion group. And we really welcome everyone to join us and to participate in those discussions. And I know some folks on here today have already been in attendance at one or more of our meetings, but if you haven't so far and you'd like to be on the list for notifications for those in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to add you to the list. And it looks like we have just a couple minutes for questions if anyone has anything right now that they're curious about or wants to share their experience with working with MathML tagging if they already do so. Please feel free to unmute and share. All right. Oh, let's see one thing in the chat. Oh,
Hi
I got
there.
a thank you. Oh, hi.
Hi, it's Toby Ferguson.
Hi, Toby.
So I've been doing math for quite a while, and the NIMAS files are kind of all over the place as far as tagging goes. Sometimes you get really nicely tagged files that convert really easy. Other times, like I'm working on a calculus book right now that I don't know how NIMAS or how the tagging would even be sufficient for this kind of material.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the stuff that I've been running across, I mean, a lot of them are pretty good, but there are situations where things are nearly impossible. So as a transcriber, you just kind of have to be really aware of kind of the limits of the tagging, and you have to really be vigilant about what happens with each file, because I mean, like there's even a difference between, say, 2 different algebra books from the same company. They can come in tagged totally different. So anyway,
That's a great point. And it's, one thing that's important to note here, and something that Rosemary's been doing testing around, is that there are kind of like 2 different issues that can arise with MathML tagging and your transcription software. One, is that the MathML tagging in the XML file is insufficient or incorrect in some way. The other is that the way that that MathML tagging is translated by the Braille transcription software is not happening correctly. So there's kind of two different things that could be happening, but in any time that you are noticing that, especially if it's something that you're noticing throughout a book, we would highly encourage you to let us know about it, because we would love to take a closer look at that file and see if it's a situation where we need to actually push back and ask a vendor to correct something that wasn't done correctly the first time in the MathML tagging. We have a very small team that reviews and certifies NIMAS files. So we do not receive the print books to compare the content or anything like that. So we do not go through and check every MathML expression in every file to make sure that it is tagged correctly. We aren't able to do that. So we do rely on you all to report to us anytime you're noticing issues so that we can look at them more closely. So please do. And Toby, if you want to reach out and let me know about the file you're currently working on, because we can take a closer look at that one, that would be great.
Well, the file I'm currently working on, I don't think much can be done with it, but I have reached out to you guys on another project where I did get a math book and it like had no tagging at all. And you guys were able to resolve that. It was just, I don't know how you did it, but anyway, you were able to get me a file within a week that actually had all the tags in it that were helpful.
Oh, good. A success story. We
Yeah,
love
yeah.
to hear
Yep,
that.
it's a success story.
Yeah.
I guess my point was just no matter what file you're using, what type of math you're doing or anything else, you just got to take it book by book and do your best with the files, because
Right.
sometimes they're really good and sometimes they aren't very good, but it kind of depends on the subject and that kind of thing too. So
Definitely. That's definitely true.
I have a question for Toby. Toby, are you using Braille 2000 or another transcription program for those files? I'm just curious.
I've been using Braille 2000. I used to use
Okay.
Duxbury quite a bit,
Okay. Just
but
curious.
I didn't really like Duxbury as far as the editing and stuff goes for math, because it's a little bit cumbersome compared to Braille 2000.
Okay.
That's good to know. And I think Rosemary's done a lot of testing at this point, and I don't want to speak for you, Rosemary, but I think you have come to prefer importing into BrailleBlaster first and then taking it
Yeah.
into Braille 2004 files that have MathML in them, that
Right.
tends to be a more reliable translation of the MathML tagging. So I don't know, Toby, if you've ever used BrailleBlaster. It's a free software that's available for download. So you might try that as well.
I did, and BrailleBlaster on this calculus book, BrailleBlaster actually failed on the translation.
Okay.
So
Okay.
then
Yeah.
I tried it in Braille 2000 and that failed. So I had to get a hold of Bob. And then I don't know what Bob did, but he ended up sending me a file that was actually converted. So
Okay.
One thing in there, Toby, is in my experience right now, BrailleBlaster version 2 has had problems with a couple of the larger files. I think it's got to do with the tagging, something weird in the tagging from that particular vendor. But I've been able to use version 1 to open some files that did not open in version 2. And they were the upper level math. So for what that's worth, if you run into another one, it sometimes depends on your version of BrailleBlaster. And I know they're working on BrailleBlaster version 2, because I'll submit those and say, this one didn't work, which again is something you could, I'm sure, speak for Liz, but to be glad to know, BrailleBlaster didn't work on this one, because that's the kind of thing they're working on. So
Absolutely. Yeah. We work really closely with the development team and report issues to them. So again, if you are keen to try different things, a few different versions of software or anything, and want to let us know, we are always happy to pass that information along, and it helps improve the tools for everyone. So yeah. Well, thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate it. I think we're at the top of the hour now. I'll go ahead and stop the recording.